So good morning. My name is Emily Voorhees, and I want to thank you for joining us today for the NCLA STEM-LINC winter webinar. Our speaker today is Joe Klein, who kindly agreed to host this for us to put together this presentation. Joe is the GIS and Visualization Librarian and Assistant Professor at UNC Greensboro. They previously worked at EPA for 3 years and provided support for lab activities and conducted GIS analysis. And Joe worked extensively with EnviroAtlas, which is the interactive web-based mapping application we're going to hear about today. The recording of this webinar will be uploaded to the NCLA STEM-LINC YouTube channel sometime in the next couple of weeks. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Joe.
Thank you. So I am Joe Klein. Oops. There we go. I am Joe Klein. As Emily introduced, I am the GIS and Data Visualization Librarian at UNC Greensboro. There's a picture of our Jackson Library on the bottom there with our MacGyver statue out front. He has a nice little bow tie. I do speak a little bit fast, so I have an eye on the chat. If it starts getting away from me, feel free to chat in there and let me know to slow down. Or if you have any questions, I'll do my best to monitor that as we go, but I might not get to some of the questions until the end. And I do have time at the end for questions as well. So today's objectives, I'm going to go over, do an overview of EnviroAtlas. So what is EnviroAtlas, what's on their website, what kind of data do they have, who uses it. I'm going to do a quick run through of using the interactive map. So, and that'll be a hands-on opportunity for y'all. If you have 2 screens, it's easiest. If not, you can also open up the interactive map and I'll describe what I'm doing in the map so you can click on things along with me. And then I'm going to go over an example lesson plan in action. So EnviroAtlas can be used a lot in educational instruction on environment and ecosystem and human health topics. So they have a lot of sample lesson plans, or a couple of sample lesson plans and example projects, which is really cool. So you can implement EnviroAtlas in your own library instruction or your own classes or classrooms, or just use it for your own self-guided learning, which is what I did when I was using the land cover data. So quick overview. So EnviroAtlas is an interactive website slash interactive mapping tool from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, so the US EPA, straight from their website. It's an interactive web-based tool that states, communities, and citizens can use to help inform policy and planning decisions that impact the places where people live, learn, work, and play. And that's straight out of the EnviroAtlas description bullet. So I'm going to go ahead, here's that link if anyone also wants to click on that and explore. I'm just going to show you a quick preview of what it looks like. And let me know if it's still on my slides. It should be sharing that picture of my browser right now. So here's the EnviroAtlas website. They've got the launch the map button here. So if you launch the interactive map, there's a preview of it. They also have a lot of other resources, which I kind of described a little bit with those lesson plans, but I'll go more into depth on what they have available. They've got fact sheets, publications and posters, data that you can download, so much stuff. There's a lot here, which is really neat. Alrighty, so back to the slides. So EnviroAtlas provides data and information about ecosystem services, ecosystem stressors, and human health and well-being. The ecosystem stressors are kind of, a little bit obvious, so things like pollution or different pollutants, maybe man-made things, chemical stressors, so things like SO2, CO2, carbon dioxide. So, and human health and well-being is a little bit more obvious too. So, are you getting asthma from air pollutants in your area and things like that? Ecosystem services, I wasn't personally as familiar with, but that's basically defined by EnviroAtlas and the EnviroAtlas team as the benefits that we get from having healthy ecosystems and a healthy environment. So those services include biodiversity conservation, so things like biodiversity in the species of birds and animals and wildlife around your environment, clean air, clean and plentiful water, climate stabilization, food, fuel, and materials, natural hazard mitigation, so things like earthquakes, floods, fires, and recreation, culture, and aesthetics. So, you know, is there a park next to your apartment complex where you can go and like see trees and birds and walk around? All right, so those are the ecosystem service categories that EnviroAtlas has their data sorted by. So they provide information and resources through three, I guess, main components is how I like to think of it. So they have the interactive web apps, which I'll show you hands-on in the second part of this presentation. They have data and fact sheets, so you can download the data, you can just view the data in those interactive web apps, or you can learn more about the data and background information through some fact sheets. And they love fact sheets, which I love because it's a really good way to learn more about the data without necessarily having to download a huge data set, you know, exploring around in the raw numbers. You can just read about it and then get more information if you're new to a topic. So if you're not as familiar with a certain type of environmental pollutant, you can read more about it and how it might affect human health without even looking at the data. They've also got training and educational resources. So those are those lesson plans. They have tutorial videos and some other things that I'll detail more. So the interactive web apps, I'll take a breath. The interactive web apps include EnviroAtlas's Interactive Map and the EcoHealth relationship browser, which is new to me. So when I used this, when I was at the EPA, I primarily used the data download, but I also used the interactive map to kind of explore what data they had available. So the interactive map is an easy to use GIS Lite application. And by GIS Lite, for those of you unfamiliar with geospatial data and GIS software, GIS Lite basically refers to a web app or a tool or a program that's not heavily GIS. So you don't need to really learn how to use a GIS program. You don't have to know how to do very detailed, complicated analysis. You can just slap the data up on the map, view it, and explore it. So it's a really good tool for exploring data and for basic analysis. So, you know, what data is in this certain area? Are there relationships between this data? So in this interactive map is for viewing ecosystem and health data, and it's for exploring those spatial relationships. The EcoHealth relationship browser, which I was playing around with earlier and which we will get to play around with during this presentation too, is a really cool visualization tool which you can use to explore relationships between health, the ecosystem, and those ecosystem services. So it's mostly text-based and you can click on things and summarize. It summarizes a topic for you and then shows you how it's related to the other data sets or other, I guess, aspects of environment, science and ecosystem services. So I will show you all that in action when we go into the actual website more in depth. Those data and fact sheets. So the dynamic data matrix is an interactive data explorer where users can search over 450 downloadable geospatial data layers. So they have 487, I think, when I checked this morning, but that's constantly being updated. Lots of things are being added. I'm pretty sure when I started using this tool, it did not have 487 layers. So they're adding a lot to the website over time. It's not just a static, you know, here's EnviroAtlas, we're done. So they add a lot and update often. So you can filter that data by benefit category, topic, spatial extent, so whether it's local or community data. And you can also download metadata and fact sheets about that data, which I found immensely helpful. I was learning how to use land cover raster images in a GIS program, and I didn't know anything about land cover or TIFFs or rasters or any of that. So I learned a lot through those fact sheets and that metadata, how to use it. So it's super helpful for when I have researchers or students who need geospatial data, who you know the basics of GIS, but don't necessarily know super in-depth information, so that I can direct them to those fact sheets so they can learn more. And then those fact sheets, which are comprehensive summaries of topics, complete with background information and bibliography, so you can go look for more info. And they're available for almost all available data layers, and this is one of my pet peeves, which I'll show you on the website too. So it'll have a little PDF symbol and you can download the PDF for a fact sheet, but if there's not one available, it will say coming soon, which is cute, but you know, I'd rather know there's no fact sheet in the moment. But that's just a pet peeve of mine. Oops. All right, so training and education resources that are available on the EnviroAtlas site. They have training and tutorial videos. So the biggest tutorial is their interactive story map tutorial. So that has step-by-step video and text guidance on how to use the tools and features of the interactive map. So that's for very, step-by-step hands-on if you need a lot of more in-depth guidance on how to do a specific function. And they also have accompanying demo videos, which are hosted on YouTube, so anyone can watch them, which are a little bit less step-by-step and more just for showing what features are available too. So I highly recommend checking those out if you want more after this presentation. They have also got example projects and lesson plans. So they have examples of uses for those EnviroAtlas tools and data. Some of the examples are from the EnviroAtlas team or from the EPA, various EPA groups that work with EnviroAtlas. And other examples are from the user community. So researchers at universities and students. I think one group from UNC, Chapel Hill, did, it was basically their capstone project using this tool. So they created a story map of their own and it's hosted on the EnviroAtlas site so that you can access it. Or not hosted on, but linked to on their site. They also have lesson plans which primarily focus on the K through 12 group. They've also got some for undergraduate education, and they call it K through 12 plus. So it would be appropriate for, I guess, beginners in general, so people that could use or are looking for an introductory environment and ecosystem experience or instruction. So if you're at a public library and you want to do a session on, how can you get the public or your community involved in environmental justice, you could do Introduction to EnviroAtlas using one of their lesson plans or examples, and people can learn about it. Before I move on, does anybody have questions about that sort of thing? I'll keep an eye on the chat for like half a minute. Okay, no cues. Thank you, Leah. All right, so I'm going to move on to actually taking a look at the website now that I've gone over the basics or what we might find there. We're going to actually dig into those topics that I showed you, those resources. So here's the link, epa.gov/EnviroAtlas, and I'll put this in the chat actually, just in case, so that when I move on, y'all can still have that. And your browser should automatically put the HTTP :/ in there, but there we go. Oops. All right. So back to this website is where that should take you. And I'm going to go down. I'm going to show you kind of things in backwards order from how I just described them. So I'm going to go through the tutorial and learning resources first, and then through the data and the data matrix, and then at the end we'll look at the interactive applications so that I can actually go into depth with those a little bit more. So looking at the educational materials and those publications and posters, and I think they've got their example projects are up here and how to use EnviroAtlas. And once again, once you get to this page, that's just kind of at the bottom. So the training and tutorial videos, everything kind of looks like this once you click into a page. It'll have your information. Sometimes there's a link that says get started. And you'll note this column on the left, this bar has kind of like basic navigation. So every page that you enter should have this basic navigation, and that mirrors the organization on that first home site. So here's their YouTube training videos. They've got a user's guide in PDF format, and then they also have that story map, which can take you through step by step. So I'm not going to go in depth on that. You are welcome to click on that. I'm going to go back to the home page and look at those educational materials, which is underneath resources and publications. I'm just going to show you all these real quick because they're really cool. They have short overview videos for some, if not most of these, and there's also materials like teacher's guides and PDFs, and handouts, worksheets, things like that, which are super cool. And I have an example at the end of this presentation that we will go through, which I've distilled from one of these lesson plans. Actually, this building a Greenway one. So if you click on something, it'll have a video to kind of explain the lesson. You can access the case study lesson. and they have a lot of more resources down here. I think this is underneath EnviroAtlas and Education, examples from teachers and students. They've got that capstone course, and then a basic worksheet which you could use. So I'm opening up this using EnviroAtlas to identify underserved communities. So this is from UNC Chapel Hill. And they basically went and made a story map of how they used it using raw data downloads, which is really similar to how I used it as well. They found the relevant data, used the metadata of the fact sheets to interpret it, and then used the GIS program to fully explore that data. And here's kind of a sample on the right of what it looks like when you download that data. And here's an example, was that second link. That's a worksheet that you could use in a class, for example, if you have kids coming in to do a nature tour, a nature walk, you could do this lesson beforehand to kind of give them an example of, you know, how to use this really cool tool, but not necessarily at a super complicated level. So I think this one is just the basic introduction to, you know, we have Piedmont regions, we've got different climates and plants and animals, depending on where you are at in North Carolina. All right, so back to the EnviroAtlas page. I'm going to go back home, and I'm going to scroll down again. So those were the training and lesson plans, educational resources. So now I'm going to look at the data resources. So that's in this lower left, I guess, category, EnviroAtlas Data. So they have an About page, which I'm just going to click on that. Which kind of shows you the coverage. They've got two major components of data, and one of those being national data, and then populated places at high resolution, which is also known as community data sets. And they've got the list of what's available. I can zoom in on that so that is larger for y'all. So one that I used extensively was Durham. They've also got Baltimore, Washington, DC, and a couple of other places. Still developing Seattle, Tacoma, and San Diego areas. So, and these were all selected based on a couple of components. So like, you know, how much data was already available through like state government data repositories, how much, how useful these would be for existing projects. And they have fact sheets for all of these too. So if you went down to one of those communities, you were super interested in looking at Durham, for example, just because it's the North Carolina data set, you can learn more about Durham, about its land cover makeup, about its demographics, and about their ecosystem services that are available there. So they have some, I guess, previews of what the map might look like, which is super cool. They use this blue, yellow, and green color scheme in the map. All right, so that's that fact sheet. So that's the community, I guess, so data coverage. And I'm going to use this bar on the left instead of clicking back to the home page. So the dynamic data matrix is, if you were to download data or look for layers, say you're looking for, you know, resources on a lesson about, I guess, air pollutants. So you could go to this data matrix and see what layers they have available. You can search. So if I wanted to search, let's say, I think carbon, it'll pop up carbon monoxide. For carbon dioxide, I might actually have to type in CO2. Or some other sort of thing. So you can use their search function. They've also got those benefit categories, which I listed earlier in the presentation. So the biodiversity conservation, clean air, clean and plentiful water, etc. And this null usually says no benefit category. I don't know why it's showing up as null right now. 30 minutes ago, it showed up as no category assigned. So that's interesting. And then they have little symbols associated with that too. So a data layer might be associated with more than one of those categories. So for example, this one is clean and plentiful water, recreation, culture, and aesthetics, and biodiversity conservation. And that's acres of land enrolled in CRP. And you can see as I highlight over things, they've got a lot of good tooltip alt text. So it'll, if you, I guess, hover over most things in this interactive data matrix, it'll give you more information about it. You can also search by topic, so things like carbon storage, employment, quality of life is an interesting one to look at, near road environments, a bunch of different topics. And you can do extent. So is it a national data set, which is going to be more, I guess, broad, or is it going to be one of those community data sets? And one thing to note about the community data sets that I forgot to mention is it's much more higher resolution data. So if you're using things like land cover data, it'll be very high resolution images. So I worked with 1 meter resolution data. 1 meter is a little bit over 3 feet. I'm 5 feet tall. My arm span is 5 feet roughly. So EnviroAtlas has land cover data that is smaller, basically, or more defined than the width of my arms, which is pretty cool. So if you had like a person wearing a brown shirt and a person wearing a green shirt standing next to each other, the images that they use would show those as 2 different pixels. So, green for trees or forest and brown for dirt or impermeable surfaces. So it's really, really high resolution. Versus the national data sets, which tend to be a little bit older, a little bit bigger, because they use different satellite imagery and different resources to make those images. Okay, so moving on real quick. So here's an example of those fact sheets. So if I look at the agricultural land per capita for a community, here's the fact sheet for that information. So, if I know absolutely nothing about agricultural land per capita, I don't know what that means. It'll tell you not only about agricultural land, but also about the per capita information too. So it'll tell you how this data was created, how you can access it, including how to search it in the search box if you wanted to add it to EnviroAtlas, and then where can you get more information. I'm pretty sure if it is linked to a lesson plan as well, it will link to that lesson plan in the fact sheet, but that just depends on which data you are looking at. And there's also metadata, so things like, has this data been updated, when was it added, things like that. So once you're done finding your and exploring your data set, you can go to their download page, and I just wanted to show you all this real quick in case you do download something. This is just a basic survey that they have pop up standard before you get to the download page, so don't freak out. You're welcome to fill out these forms if you do download their data. They use it a lot for, how are people using this data, what do we need to improve on, and then sometimes they'll send out surveys if they have one. I have not gotten one yet, but you can also just submit a blank form and they I guess automatically remove it. So here's that national data. They have a spreadsheet for all of the data layers available. So this includes stuff that's not available in the interactive map. So if you are looking for something, can't find it in the map, check out their data download, because they might have something more for those of you that would be using this data on their own. So they've got ecosystem markets data, which is pretty cool, and I know almost nothing about that. There's also additional national data sets, so things like connectivity with water, which is really cool. So, does a river connect with another river? A lot of focusing on water for the national data sets. For community data, they have a whole table here, and here's kind of their information about what these files include. So I worked a lot with the Durham community data with the land cover. So that one's not too big to download, but once you download and unzip it, it's huge. So they have a lot of information, and then their changelog has information about what they've changed. So all of this is available if you use the raw data. But I'm not going to really show you all that today. I'm most interested in the web apps. So I'm going to go back home just so you can see how to get to these web apps from the homepage. It's underneath interactive applications. And I'll show you all the EcoHealth relationship browser first, because I want to do a little bit more in depth with the interactive map. So I'm going to click on EcoHealth relationship browser. There will be information about what this tool is, how they'll have a demo video, fact sheet, which they love. And then also recent evidence, recent features, and a little bit more background info. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and I did that a little fast, so it's just the launch the browser, it's an image, and it'll open it up in a new tab. So it looks pretty basic. It's just, word bubbles. You can click on things, and it'll explore relationships between topics, and you can also click this drop-down menu and click on a specific topic. I really like looking at aesthetics and engagement with nature because there's so many bubbles, because it's got so many factors behind it. So one thing I remember from working as a student services contractor with the EPA is we would do a study about green spaces and human health and stress and biomarkers for stress. And there were just so many confounding factors. So it's interesting to be able to go into this and say, oh, okay, so if I'm going to do a paper about stress. I should include aesthetics and engagement with nature, maybe recreation and physical activity. And now I think there's even information about like air pollutants and things like that and how they can cause stress. I'm going to go back up to aesthetics and engagement. So the green arrows kind of show things that improve, or I think they also have a legend, which would help. Yeah, so things that go into aesthetics and engagement with nature, so those ecosystem services, those benefits, and then the human and health impacts of the aesthetics and engagement with nature, or I guess resources that go into it. So if you click on it, it'll give you a little bit more information. So it's kind of like a visual encyclopedia, which is super cool. So like things like ADHD, has water quality linked to it. If you click on the eye, it'll tell you more information about it. So there's a study, 2007, that looked at water quality, specifically manganese and ADHD. So you could look at that paper in their citations and look into it further, which is super cool. Okay, so that's the EcoHealth relationship browser. And now I'm going to move on to the interactive map. Let me make sure my slides here are caught up. All right, so using the interactive map. So this, I believe, is the second component of my slides. I'm going to click on this in a moment, but I'll come back to this slide because I want to give you all an idea real quick of what we're going to find in this interactive map. So the primary things are map tools and features. So there's a change analysis tool. Oh yeah, Leah, I love the EcoHealth browser. I'm going to play around with it more. I was not familiar with it when I started putting slides together for this presentation, so I'm very glad that that's around. Okay, so the map tools and features, the change analysis tool. So I believe that's over time. Are there changes in data? And that's mostly, I think, at a national level. So, you know, from 1992 to 2000, what's the change? They've got a compare my area tool, a hydrologic unit or HUC navigation tool. So, you know, to streams and rivers, where do they connect to different units? That's especially helpful in North Carolina, I think, for issues like runoff, or if you've got runoff into rivers, you know, what lakes and bodies of water downstream do those wash into, essentially. Raindrop analysis, so if it rains, what runoff, where is that runoff going? Is there flooding? I think it might not cover flooding, but we'll take a look. There's also elevation profiles, and you can save your session, which I have not played around with that extensively, but in theory, there's an option for you to export your session and those layers so that you can import it when you come back to the map. So there's some map tools and features. There's also a number of data layer categories. So there's the EnviroAtlas data, which is all of those layers that are in the data matrix. There's demographic layers, which includes information from like the decennial census and the American Community Survey. And I think they have 2010 and 2000 up for the census, and we'll take a look at what they have for the ACS when we get in there. They've also got time series layers, external and custom data, so you can search for layers, especially on ESRI's Living Atlas, or through other EPA or government portals. So you can add them by URL, you can upload your own files, say you have like a point, a bunch of addresses or something, or, you know, historical places that you want to add to that map. You can upload those, or, you know, say you're at a specific library and you want to look at your library, you can upload that as a point with information about that library. So I've been experimenting around. You could upload things from the IMLS, Institute of Museum and Library libraries. You can upload their survey data, essentially, which tells you about the population served by those libraries, more data about the library. And you could add that to the map to kind of explore the environment around it. There's also featured collections, which are linked to those lesson plans. And the example that I like to use is building a greenway, a case study, which we'll take a look at, but I want to play around with this map first and look at all of these features. So I'm going to go back. We're going to go ahead, click on that link. I've already got it open, so I'm not going to click on it. And then you're going to click on Launch the Map, which is this little blue button. It'll show this really cool loading screen, which is super cool. And then you'll see there's their disclaimer. So a lot of this is, more exploratory, not necessarily for use in direct research purposes, depending on how you use it and whether you go beyond to look at the metadata behind the data to see if it's appropriate for use in your study. But it's really good for exploratory, for learning, for basic policy, I guess, background, if you're looking up, say, where to put a trail in your community to improve green space. So they've got a tour, which is really cool, and you're welcome to do that. They've got specific examples, which use those featured collections. And then they've just got an explore, which I'm going to click on real quick just to show y'all around. Excuse me. All right. So I'm going to start with these tools, which are the first things that I mentioned. You've got some basic mapping tools. You can draw and measure on the map. If you wanted to make like, a cool polygon or something, you could add that. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. They've also got a legend. So if you have anything up here and there's like symbols and you're not sure what it is, you can always pop up the legend that lives in here. There's the change analysis tool. So you can look at different scenarios for climate change. And if you pop up the little eyes, it'll pop up information as well. So if you need more info, most of the background info will load within that map, which is pretty cool. They've got starting year for baseline. So this is a little bit more, I'm not as familiar with baseline and how all of the science, which years I should choose, but it's fun to play around with for me. And if you're someone who knows a little bit more about it, or if you're leading in a lesson plan, this would be really cool to look at. So you can look at things like precipitation, are we going to be getting a lot? Or what's the difference between 1950 to the future, or to even, this year, last year. And you can also download some average values as well. And they have a user guide, which is really helpful. All right, there's compare my area. So you can find a specific place. I'm pretty sure, yeah, so addresses will work. And it'll give you like a little watershed report. You can also do census tract, and it'll pop that up in a report. Whoops. So it's from the American Community Survey, and there's lots of information. You can also get like a data table to look at the different counties, states, and tracts that your thing's in. So if you're looking at a specific library or a specific school, so say you're a school media specialist or librarian, you can find information there about your school to show the kids, which is kind of cool. I'm gonna clear that. And then if you zoom out, you can still zoom out. There's HUC navigation, so if you click on any location, you can identify upstream or downstream watersheds within that stream market. So we have one stream up here that's kind of notorious for flooding this neighborhood. So if you clicked there, it'll show you what watershed that is, so North Buffalo Creek. So I believe this is one of the more downstream parts, which is really cool. These are more upstream, so if these flood, typically this one floods. And it's still loading. It usually takes a hot minute, so I'm gonna close that. There might be a way to clear that. I'll clear it later. There's the raindrop analysis. So you select a location, see the general raindrop flow path, which is pretty cool actually. And it loads. You can do different settings. I'm not sure what the changing colors are in the map in the background. This is one of those things I've been needing to play around with a lot. I've mostly used the raw data. And I'm going to refresh because I think I froze it. All right, back to Explore. All right, they've got elevation profile, which is for a specific point as well. And you can do measurements here too. So if you wanted to see the difference in elevation between 2 points, there's also the save session option. So you can save it, export, and then load to file. Or load from a file if you download it and want to restart later. If you're like me and you keep freezing things. And then there's a select function. If you have a lot of data points or layers added to the map, you can select and it'll kind of list them so that you can select one or two and play around more. So then there's also the basic base map. For those of you that aren't familiar with web apps or GIS like programs, they have a base map gallery. Right now it's just set to topographic, but you can also use things like light gray canvas, navigation, or street maps, or community maps even, which are very helpful depending on what scope, like what your project is that you're looking at. Some of them take longer to load than others. The community map looks really pretty. It's very, I guess, new age techie. And then there's also the layer list. So this is going to be where your layers are loaded once you've added them to your map, and you can unselect them to remove them from the map or from view, or select them to get them there. And there's other options once you have things in here. All right, so that's the actual map. There's the zooming out, zooming in. You can find an address. Home, I believe, will just zoom out to the US, the continental US. And I'm going to keep zooming in on Greensboro because that's where I am. So you can search layers. So it starts you off default. Here's where the data layers categories are. It starts you off in EnviroAtlas Data. So if you know you need land cover, you can just search land cover and it'll pop up a bunch of different ones. I believe if you click on them, it'll collapse/expand them. So if you're looking at things like, let's say, land cover type. So I want to look at green space per capita. You click the little button, it'll tell you what categories are in there. The eye will give you more info and also a link to the fact sheet. And it loads. It'll kind of take a little minute. Let's zoom out. There we go. So, and this is one of those ones where land cover is available for communities. Not at the national data set, or at least this specific green space per capita, because they're looking at that super high resolution meter square data. So you can look for Durham, and it'll give you that community region. So you could zoom in on areas. I'm going to pull up my, I guess in the layer list, if you hit this little like arrow button, it'll kind of show you a legend for each layer. So this is just the community boundaries in this color. And I think you can even open up the aperture table. For the boundaries, it's not as useful. For these, it's kind of cool to see the actual numbers behind the things. So when you download this data, it will look similar to this in your Excel program or whatever data editor you're using. It'll look like that. All right, so the green space per capita kind of has a wonky, I always forget what it's called, separations or gaps. So it's separated out into these different categories. I don't know if they're quantiles, but that's something you can find out in the fact sheets and in the background information. So it goes from like 0 to 39 square meters or meters squared per person. And then the highest category is, 633 to 13 million. So that's a big amount of data to be put in one category. So, but it does make those smaller categories stand out more. So for example, this area, if you click on the map, it'll pop up with that shape. When you have more than one layer added to the map, this is where it gets kind of complicated, and that's where that select tool will come in handy. So if you've got like 5 layers, you can make it clear that you're only selecting in this layer, not these layers, which is helpful. So it'll tell you the block group ID. There's 52 meters squared per person here. And it's a tiny little block group, so it's interesting. Maybe it's a paved neighborhood. All right, so that's that example. Here's where you can add demographic layers, is up in this middle tab. So if you wanted to look at the census, or the American Community Survey. So if you wanted to look at things like housing, income or poverty, place of birth, population, language, employment. This one's cool. So employment and bicycle. I think that might be, if you click on I, it'll tell you more, but that I think tells you how they get to work, or a category about the workforce. So they have things like travel time to work, taxi cab. It's really cool. There's so many different data sets too. So it's mostly just about exploring once you know what you want. Oh, and there's the quantile and natural breaks versus equal interval. So if you click add to map, I'm not going to do that because it will probably freeze my browser. And I don't want to chance it. All right. So time series layers, there's those climate scenarios, different peak emissions, if you can look at different categories. And then here's where you would add your own data. Say you want to look at like FEMA's flood. This is the EPA Geo platform, but you can also look on ArcGIS online. oops, that might not show up. There we go, flood hazard layer. So I could add the flood hazard layer, which is hosted by FEMA, and a bunch of other data sets. So NC State has a lot of data published through ArcGIS Online and other geo platforms that you can add, which is really cool. So basically anywhere that any geospatial layers that are on the federal platform can be added. So that is that. I'm gonna switch back to my slides real quick. These are the things we just took a look at. And now I'm gonna look at this example lesson plan. So I think we have 15 more minutes. So I'm gonna look at the Building a Greenway case study. I'm gonna show you how to get to that in the interactive map, and then I'm gonna show you how to get to it from the just general EnviroAtlas site. So you can get to it from both ways. They've got a lot of access points, which is cool. All right, so from the map, it's this featured collections tab on the front, or when you first load the map, there's that, actually let me try that. When you reload it, when it pops up with Tour, Learn, or Explore, the Learn tab will take you into those community featured things. Oh no. There we go. Okay, so get started with some examples in the middle, and it'll just take you to this featured collections page. So Building a Greenway, a case study. If you click on it, it opens up this cool like about thing. You can add it to your map, and while it's adding, I'm gonna just click proceed because we don't have any data. While that's adding and loading in the background, I'm gonna read a little bit about it. You can view it in the Geo platform, which is S3's ArcGIS Geo platform. Has more information about metadata, who produced it, when it was produced, but most of that's also on this page. So the summary tells you that this map collection is part of a case study lesson module. So I'm going to open that in a new tab, but that is that case study lesson that you can find, say you're doing a class for a K through 12 or undergraduate class. It's intended for secondary education, so undergraduate and community programs. So if you're at a public library, or if you're just doing a community program at your university or special library or elsewhere, it can really be cool to look at. So the map layers apply to actual greenway planning initiatives. It can be used across the United States in a real world situation. So these layers are real layers, but the case study is hypothetical. So they have a case study, which I'll describe in a minute, but I have summarized on my slides so y'all don't have to read all of these texts. They're basically proposing a green space trail or a greenway. And they've got some directions. So it's initially launched at the local scale. It zooms in on Florida in northern Tampa. It has these layers preloaded, and then here's all of these layers that it loads. So it does take a minute sometimes. So if you zoom out, sometimes it's a little bit easier to see because things will overlap. So this is a trail. This is a Boy Scout trail. I believe that is, yeah, trailheads, so I could get rid of those. There's proposed trails, which the symbol is like a white dash. They're still loading right now. And one way you can tell if it's still loading is in the lower right. There's like a little load bubble that'll pop up, which I have found useful to tell whether it's frozen on me or whether it's just working. You could add % tree cover. I recommend if you have green space layers, only having one loaded at a time because they'll overlap with each other and make it harder to see. Percent population is visualized with symbols, so you could add it with this overlay. Draw a layer on top. So the bubbles right now are underneath this layer, so you can always draw a layer on top and it'll pop them to the top so that they're not hidden by this map thing right now. I wish there was a draw layer on bottom. Because I would definitely just put tree cover on the bottom. So proposed trail, draw a layer on top, and this white trail pops up. This is the best trail greenway according to this scenario. All right, so that's what it looks like in the map, and that's how you get to it in the map. I'm gonna go back to my slides real quick. Whoa. I hit escape. Alrighty. There we go. Okay, so this hypothetical case study, which I got to on that EnviroAtlas map, basically in this case study, funding to complete a pilot section of a greenway has been granted to the City Parks and Rec Department. The proposed pilot section is being presented as a concerned citizen. You're asked to review the case and weigh in on a selection of that pilot greenway section at an upcoming public hearing. The goals of the Parks and Rec Department when they made this proposed greenway is to improve access to and the use of parks and green spaces. They want to enhance habitat for biota, and they want to encourage physical activity and recreational opportunities, particularly for aging populations. And I have a link, which I realize since y'all don't have the slides, but this is just on that EnviroAtlas site. They have their case study page, which I'll show you after I go through these examples, and the PDFs are all available there. I link them here in case. So this is one of the worksheets that's available, and I'll click it just to open it to show y'all what it looks like. And I apologize, it keeps opening up in a different tab. There we go. All right, so here's the actual case study page, which is down in those educational materials. There's a spot that says building a greenway, a case study. Here's all the files that you could download. So there's handouts and teacher handouts. So I've got the worksheet Understanding Maps. So it basically has keywords or vocabulary, and then it's got figures from another handout or from other slides, as well as a description of the data, which I have summarized in my slides, so we don't have to keep going back and forth between the two. So back to the slide. So you'll see it's the same as in that worksheet. So figure 2, for us, we're going to use the actual map. So if you haven't opened the map, and if you have 2 monitors to make it help, or if you have 2 windows open up on your monitor, works best too. I would pull up these slides on one and the EnviroAtlas map on the other. So figure 2 shows the percent of the Canton population, Canton being our hypothetical town in Florida, that is over 70 years old. So it's the percent of the population that's over 70 on top of a map showing percent green space. So if I go back to our map, so these circles, are percent population over 64 years old. So it says 70 in the example, but it says 64 for in actuality. And here's where it starts to get hairy depending on what you have selected. All right, so for this proposed trail, once it loads, you can see that the percent population over 64 years, so 53 to 100%, so majority, or there's, yeah, so the majority of the population is 64, so going back to statistics class. And then they have smaller categories for the other ones, so a lot of these are 0 to 10% are over 64. As the circles get bigger, there's more people over 64. I'm going to collapse that and show you, I'm going to get rid of tree cover and I'm going to load green space instead. So that's percent green space for this block group. I think it's actually looking at census tracts. Block group. So it's looking at block groups. And an easy way to do that is just to click on it and then if you scroll over to tell you what block group it is. So it's a block group. So the dark blue have more green space, and the less, the lighter yellow colors, and the lime green, I guess, here has less green space. So the land cover in that area less than, or the majority is not green space. So trees, bushes, grass, I think are all included in that green space category, just greenery. A lot of times it'll be like paved surfaces. So if you look at cities, so I think Durham especially, so you can tell this is where a lot of the business areas are. There's also less folks over 74 here versus the more, country, I guess, or less developed areas that have more green space and also more older folks. So if the goal of the Parks and Rec Department when they're making this trail is to improve access to green space areas for the elderly population or for folks over 64, you might want to prioritize areas that have less screen space already. So where can we get more opportunities, more access, you know, to people in this area, to this area? Because the folks living in this green area have access to green space in theory, since they live around it. So we want folks like this block group or this block group would be good candidates. Does anyone, if you are interested or if you know one that's like super interesting, it's kind of hard to do it without sharing the screen, but if you are in the same view as me, I guess, and you see something interesting like this line here, maybe put in the chat if you have questions or comments about, you know, this one has a lot of people, but there's no green space whatsoever. And I'll keep an eye on that too. This is one of those lesson plans that works a little bit better in person, I think, because you can hand out those worksheets and have everyone go through it. So I guess one thing, so yeah, does anybody out there, if you're looking at that map, do you see any trends related to the elderly population in green space? Like, is there a trend that you notice, or does it seem kind of random? I'll zoom out, maybe. Yeah, I'll zoom out so you can see more green space areas. You can put that in the chat, or if you prefer to talk, I think you can unmute to do that. I will say my favorite is things like the airport, where nobody lives. I know one that I notice especially is this line right here. And it doesn't seem to correlate too much with the number of folks over 64. But I do kind of notice a lot of the smaller ones are in the lighter areas. There are some kind of down here, but especially in this northern half. A lot of the smaller, so less folks over 64 are in kind of like the medium range green spaces. And there's a lot more folks over 64 in areas that have a lot more green space in this northern half. So this might even be an interesting thing where you could add in demographic layers and maybe see income and poverty. And I want to look at, this one's interesting because you can only really look at, I'm gonna look at income. Because I have a bet or a theory that these folks might be better off economically. This might take a while, so we might not be able to follow up on that. But that's something that you could explore with this tool if you had someone in class who was curious about it. And while that's loading in the background, I'll go back because I have one more little thing here. So one of my favorite things about those lesson plans, so there are options for various audiences, although they are largely K through 12 aimed. This green spaces one can be adapted to any level essentially. So especially if you had, say, graduate students, if you have graduate students who aren't familiar with GIS and geography and geographical concepts, but they might be working with it in the future. So you could totally adapt it up or down or anywhere you need it to go. You can also adapt it for time allotted. So the green spaces lesson plan also has worksheets for stakeholder slips is what they call them, which is really cool. So the general scenario is that you are a concerned citizen or you're a member of the city council or you're a member of City Parks and Rec. But they've also got things like you're an avid bicyclist or you bicycle, you commute by bicycle. You're a bird watcher, you're a mom with 6 kids that like to play soccer in the park. They have a lot of different stakeholder slips and you can add to those or, you know, do 2 or 3 depending on how much time you have for an activity. The green space one has figures in the other handout, which I have not shown y'all. So you could do it without internet access in theory, although the tool itself really lends itself to more investigation if you do have the internet available. But you can use it without it too, which is really cool for areas, especially if you're like at a public library, you've got limited public computers. It's also very cool for formal or informal educational settings. So this is something you could go through as part of a class in a formal setting with homework and whatnot, or you could do it informally just as a workshop, or super informal, you know, get together with friends and learn about greenways and maps. I believe the formal ones, I'll look at the page that says this too in a minute, but the formal educational, I guess, lesson plans are aligned with next generation and state science standards. I'm not familiar with what that means, but I believe that means for folks who are in public schools, they align with state standards for education so that they can be included in the curriculum as well. And there's just an example of that stakeholder slips handout. But I'm gonna show y'all. Back to this, it's still loading. This is one of those ones where it might take a minute, especially since we have so many other layers loaded or areas loaded. So I'm gonna go back to that EnviroAtlas home website real quick because I believe I have 3 minutes and I wanna make sure y'all have time for questions. So educational materials, grades K through 12, they've got them listed out by level. So there's that Building a Greenway, a case study. If you click access, it'll take you to that page that I showed you earlier where it has the handouts and all of the about pages. So there's lots to explore. All right, that is still loading. So it is 10:58. Does anybody have questions? IMLS data, are those data sets available? Let us see. Currently available in the government sets. So I would bet that would be either the federal geo platform. And this is something where you could also add as a URL or a file. So you could import it. I'm just gonna search. So within the federal, there's nothing. Oop, public library survey. There we go. And that's one of those ones where you want to check on the details and see who created this data set. Sometimes it's not the official authoritative data set. This might take a while to load too. I think I clicked out on it as it loaded. But if you click on details, usually it takes you to that GeoPlatform site where you can learn more about it. I think usually it'll say the federal agency that produced it if it's an authoritative, but sometimes the feature service, you know, an individual user in that group will publish it. So it'll have their email instead, which I kind of like. You can email them. All right, and then there were the other things that I had showed y'all already. And then here's my contact information in case we run out of time and you have more questions. You're welcome to email me, tweet at me if you use the tool and you want to post about it or tweet about it. Yeah, and I guess I'm taking more questions if there are any.
Hey Joe, it's Taylor. I don't have a question, but I do just have a comment to throw out to the audience. EPA, the team that works on this here, as you can tell, they love to share because they've got all this great info up for free available on the web too. But they also love for you guys to share with them, like ways that you might use the tool to work with a class, or ideas that you have for a future collection or a future case study. So sharing is caring. So they want to work with you and make sure that the tool is working for you. Just throwing in my 2 cents.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's really nice. I wish that I had more opportunities to work directly with the team while I was at the EPA. I was mostly just using their data. But now that I'm a librarian and using the data from a different point, it's really nice to meet with the team and see what they're up to. And also with the data taking forever to load, that is my browser. I have a lot of add-ons added to my Chrome browser, so that won't necessarily be the same for you when you're using this map tool. I have a very feature-heavy browser open right now. So don't be worried.
We're having issues today with web connectivity, so it could be that that server is just really slow. It happens here.
Oh, okay.
May not be you at all. So Joe, can folks contact you directly if they have questions that they think of later, or do you want me to collect those and forward them if I get any? Or
I am perfectly fine with y'all contacting me directly, but either would work. If it's like about specific data sets or the tool, I'm sure the EnviroAtlas team would be able to answer those questions better. But if it's just general questions, especially related to the presentation, I'm happy to help.
well, thank you so much for putting this together for us. I know it was kind of from scratch, so it's much appreciated.
Yeah, and there are slides and publications available from EnviroAtlas, but I didn't feel comfortable using those without prior permission, so it was a self-inflicted from scratch.